In the heart of California's Silicon Valley during the 1950s and 1960s, a quiet revolution was brewing. Technology was advancing rapidly, but for most people, computers were giant machines locked away in government facilities or universities. They were mysterious, intimidating, and far too expensive for everyday people to touch. The idea that one day everyone could own a personal computer sounded almost like science fiction. But for a young boy named Steve Jobs, this dream would become his life's mission. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco. His biological parents, a graduate student couple, gave him up for adoption. He was taken in by Paul and Clara Jobs, an ordinary working-class couple. Paul was a machinist who loved working with his hands, and Clara was a warm, loving mother. From the beginning, Steve's life was shaped by contrasts. On one side, a humble upbringing, on the other, a restless, curious mind that always demanded more. Jobs grew up in a neighborhood filled with engineers and tinkerers, thanks to the booming electronics industry of the time. He would often watch his father take apart old cars and carefully put them back together. Paul taught Steve not just about mechanics, but about craftsmanship, the idea that even the parts nobody sees should be made with care. This lesson stuck with Steve for life, later shaping Apple's obsession with design and detail. Meanwhile, across town, another boy named Steve Wozniak, often called Woz, was also growing up fascinated by electronics. Wozniak was a shy genius who loved building gadgets, circuit boards, and computers for fun. Where Jobs had a sharp mind for vision, design, and persuasion, Woz had the technical brilliance to bring ideas to life. Fate brought the two Steves together in the early 1970s. Jobs, still a teenager, was already known for being intense, charismatic, and full of wild ideas. Woz, a few years older, was the kind of guy who could design an entire computer circuit in his head. Their friendship was instant and powerful. They balanced each other perfectly. One of their first collaborations was not a computer, but a blue box. This was a small electronic device that allowed people to make free long-distance phone calls by tricking the telephone system. It was a mischievous project, but it showed both of them something important. Technology could empower ordinary people. Jobs later said that without the blue box, there would have been no Apple. At the same time, Jobs was exploring life in ways far beyond electronics. He dropped out of college after just one semester at Reed College, feeling that formal education wasn't feeding his creativity. He studied calligraphy, experimented with meditation, traveled to India in search of spiritual meaning, and lived in communes. All of these experiences, though unusual, shaped the way he thought about simplicity, beauty, and meaning, principles that would later define Apple products. By the mid-1970s, the world of technology was beginning to change. Hobbyist groups, like the Homebrew Computer Club in Silicon Valley, were experimenting with personal computers. For the first time, it seemed possible that ordinary people, not just scientists or corporations, could have a computer in their home. Jobs and Wozniak started attending these gatherings, and soon they began dreaming about creating a computer of their own. They worked in Jobs' parents' garage in Los Altos, California, a place that would later become a legendary symbol of Silicon Valley's startup culture. Wozniak designed the computer, while Jobs pushed for ways to make it appealing to people and to sell it. They had no money, so Jobs sold his Volkswagen van, and Wozniak sold his prized Hewlett-Packard calculator to fund their dream. In 1976, with little more than passion, skill, and determination, the two Steves officially started a company. They named it Apple Computer. Jobs later explained the name was chosen because he liked apples. It sounded fun, spirited, and not intimidating, and it would appear ahead of Atari in the phone book. Apple was born, not in a fancy lab or an office, but in a small garage where two young dreamers believed they could change the world, and soon they would. The year was 1976, and the world was on the edge of a technological revolution. In a small garage on Crist Drive in Los Altos, California, two young men were about to ignite a spark that would forever change the way humans interact with machines. That spark was called Apple Computer. The very first product they created was the Apple I. Unlike the giant room-sized computers of the time, the Apple I was a simple single-board computer. It didn't look like much. It didn't even have a case, just a circuit board. But it was revolutionary because it was affordable and small enough for hobbyists to use at home. Steve Wozniak, the technical mastermind, designed and hand-built the Apple I. Jobs, meanwhile, was the salesman, the dreamer, the one who believed they could turn Wozniak's creation into something bigger than just a hobby project. Jobs had an eye for opportunity. He convinced a local computer store, the Byte Shop, to order 50 units of the Apple I at $500 each. But there was a catch. They had to deliver the machines fully assembled within 30 days. The problem? Jobs and Woz had no money to buy parts. To solve this, Jobs negotiated credit from suppliers, promising to pay them back after delivering the computers. Then in the garage, they worked day and night, soldering circuits, testing boards, packaging parts. Jobs' sister and friends even joined in to help. When they finally delivered the Apple I, it was the beginning of Apple's first real business. But Jobs wasn't satisfied. He wanted to create a computer that wasn't just for hobbyists, but for everyone. He wanted something user-friendly, something that looked good, something that people would feel proud to own. Wozniak, although more interested in engineering than business, agreed to design the next machine. In 1977, they introduced the Apple II, the computer that truly launched Apple into the spotlight. Unlike the Apple I, the Apple II was ready to use right out of the box. It came in a sleek plastic case, had a keyboard built in, and could display color graphics, a breakthrough at the time. It was designed not just for engineers, but for ordinary people, families, and schools. The Apple II was an instant success. Schools began adopting it as an educational tool. Businesses started using it for spreadsheets, and hobbyists loved its expandability. A programmer named Dan Bricklin created VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet program, which turned the Apple II into a powerful business tool. Suddenly, people were buying Apple computers not just for fun, but because it could help them make money. To grow the company, Jobs and Wozniak needed funding. That's when Mike Markkula, a former Intel executive, entered the picture. Markkula invested $250,000 into Apple and became a key mentor to Jobs, teaching him about marketing, business strategy, and company building. With Markkula's guidance, Apple grew rapidly. By 1980, Apple went public. It was one of the biggest IPOs in history at the time, instantly creating hundreds of millionaires. Steve Jobs, still in his 20s, became a multimillionaire overnight. The Apple II had cemented Apple's place as a major player in the computer industry. But success also brought competition. IBM, the giant of the computer world, entered the personal computer market in 1981 with the IBM PC. Unlike Apple's closed system, IBM allowed others to clone and copy its design, which created a massive wave of IBM-compatible PCs. Apple suddenly faced a new challenge: how to stay ahead in a market that was quickly filling up with rivals. Jobs believed the answer lay in innovation. He pushed Apple's engineers to work on a new kind of computer, one that was far more advanced and user-friendly than anything before. That secret project was called Lisa, and later another smaller project within Apple would become known as the Macintosh. For Jobs, this wasn't just about computers, it was about changing the world. He envisioned machines that anyone could use, tools that would empower creativity, education, and communication. Apple was no longer just a small company from a garage. It was a rising force with a dream to put a computer in the hands of everyday people. The stage was set for Apple's greatest innovations and its biggest struggles. By the early 1980s, Apple was riding high. The Apple II had made the company rich and famous, and its young co-founder Steve Jobs had become a rising star in Silicon Valley. But Jobs wasn't content with past success. He wanted Apple to lead the next big revolution in computing. That revolution, he believed, would come through graphical user interfaces, computers that used icons, windows, and a mouse instead of lines of code typed into a screen. Jobs had first seen this idea during a visit to Xerox PARC in 1979, a legendary research lab where Xerox scientists had invented many futuristic technologies but failed to commercialize them. To Jobs, the GUI, graphical user interface, was like looking into the future, and he was determined Apple would be the one to bring it to the world. Apple poured resources into two projects, the Lisa and the Macintosh. The Lisa, launched in 1983, was technically advanced but far too expensive, costing almost $10,000. Few people could afford it, and the project was considered a failure. But the Macintosh, a smaller and more affordable machine, would become Jobs' true obsession. Jobs assembled a team of young engineers and pushed them relentlessly, often using his infamous reality distortion field, his ability to convince people to achieve things they thought were impossible. He demanded perfection, sometimes to the point of cruelty, but his charisma inspired fierce loyalty. The team believed they were building not just a computer, but a piece of history. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh with a commercial that is still remembered today. Directed by Ridley Scott, the 1984 ad portrayed Apple as the rebel fighting against the conformity of IBM, which was seen as the industry's big brother. The commercial aired during the Super Bowl and stunned the world. It wasn't just an ad, it was a cultural moment. The Macintosh itself was revolutionary. It was the first widely sold computer with a graphical interface and a mouse. It was easy to use, beautifully designed, and appealed to creative people, artists, writers, and educators. Jobs stood on stage during the launch, pulling the Mac out of a bag and letting it speak to the audience. The crowd erupted in applause. But beneath the excitement, problems were brewing. The Macintosh, though innovative, was underpowered and expensive. Software developers were slow to create programs for it, and sales did not meet Apple's ambitious expectations. Meanwhile, IBM PCs and their cheaper clones were flooding the market, running Microsoft software and rapidly becoming the industry standard. Inside Apple, tension was rising. Jobs, brilliant but difficult, clashed with colleagues and board members. His perfectionism and intensity created friction with then CEO John Sculley, whom Jobs himself had recruited from Pepsi. At first, Sculley admired Jobs' vision, but soon he realized that Jobs was unpredictable and hard to control. By 1985, Apple was struggling. The Apple II was aging, the Lisa had failed, and the Macintosh wasn't selling enough to carry the company. The board of directors had to make a decision. A power struggle erupted between Jobs and Sculley. In a dramatic showdown, the board sided with Sculley. Steve Jobs, the co-founder and visionary behind Apple, was stripped of power and eventually forced out of his own company. It was one of the most shocking moments in business history, like watching a king dethroned. Jobs was only 30 years old, suddenly adrift, and devastated by the company he had built, turning its back on him. For Apple, the years ahead would be difficult. Without Jobs' relentless vision, the company began to lose its edge. For Jobs, however, this painful defeat would become the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would eventually bring him back stronger than ever. Apple had risen and Apple had fallen, but the story was far from over. After Steve Jobs' departure in 1985, Apple entered what many call its dark years. The company still had talented engineers and a loyal customer base, but without Jobs' singular vision, Apple began to lose focus. Instead of leading the industry, Apple slowly started falling behind. CEO John Sculley tried to steer the company toward growth by launching new products, but most of them failed to make an impact. Apple's strategy became scattered, multiple versions of the Macintosh, confusing product names, and inconsistent marketing. While Apple was busy experimenting, its competitors were laser-focused. The real threat came from Microsoft. Bill Gates and his team had licensed MS-DOS to IBM and its clones, and then developed Windows, a graphical interface that borrowed heavily from ideas pioneered by Apple. Unlike Apple's closed ecosystem, Microsoft allowed any PC manufacturer to use Windows. This strategy flooded the market with affordable IBM-compatible PCs. By the early 1990s, Microsoft Windows dominated the industry, while Apple's share of the market shrank year after year. Apple tried to fight back with innovations, but many of them misfired. In 1993, the company released the Newton, one of the first personal digital assistants, PDAs. It was an ambitious product, featuring handwriting recognition, but the technology wasn't ready. The device was clunky, expensive, and mocked in the press. "Eat up, Martha," a phrase mistakenly recognized by its software, became a symbol of its failure. At the same time, Apple's internal culture began to suffer. Without Jobs' demanding leadership, Apple grew bureaucratic and slow. Different teams worked on overlapping projects, wasting resources. The once bold and daring company became cautious and confused. Financially, things worsened. Apple's revenues dropped, and its once legendary brand was losing its shine. By the mid-1990s, the company was close to bankruptcy. Analysts, competitors, and even loyal fans wondered if Apple would survive. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs was busy writing his own new chapter outside of Apple. After being ousted, he founded a new company called Next, which built advanced workstations for education and business. Next's computers were powerful, but too expensive, and the company struggled to sell them. However, its software, called Next Step, would later prove to be incredibly important. At the same time, Jobs also purchased a small computer graphics division from George Lucas. That company became Pixar Animation Studios. Under Jobs' leadership, Pixar shifted from making hardware to producing animated films. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated movie. It was a massive success, turning Pixar into a household name and Jobs into a billionaire once again. Back at Apple, things were dire. The company had gone through several CEOs after Sculley's departure. Each tried to revive the company with new products and strategies, but nothing seemed to work. By 1996, Apple's losses were piling up, and the company was running out of cash. Its computers were considered outdated compared to cheaper and faster PCs running Windows. Some industry experts predicted Apple would go bankrupt within 90 days. Others suggested it should be sold to a bigger company like IBM or Sun Microsystems. For many, it seemed like Apple's story was about to end. But fate had other plans. In 1997, Apple made a bold decision that would change everything. It acquired Next, Steve Jobs' struggling company, for $429 million. The deal brought Jobs back to the company he had co-founded over a decade after being exiled. Along with him came Next's advanced operating system, which would become the foundation for future versions of Mac OS. When Jobs returned, Apple was broken, demoralized, and on the verge of collapse. But with his energy, vision, and ruthless decision-making, he was about to transform Apple from a company on life support into the most valuable company in the world. The comeback was about to begin. By 1997, Apple was in chaos. The once celebrated innovator was now seen as a failing company with little chance of survival. Its product lineup was bloated with dozens of confusing models, its operating system was outdated, and its finances were bleeding red ink. Many believed Apple was only months away from bankruptcy. But then came a twist that nobody expected. Steve Jobs returned. When Apple acquired Next in 1997, the deal wasn't just about technology, it was also about bringing Jobs back. At first, he returned as an advisor, but within months, he took on the role of interim CEO. To the world, he joked that the title stood for ICEO. In reality, he was taking full control. The moment Jobs walked back into Apple's headquarters, the energy shifted. Employees were nervous, some even afraid, because Jobs had a reputation for being brutally demanding. But they also felt a spark of hope. If anyone could save Apple, it was him. Jobs' first move was drastic: simplify everything. At that time, Apple had dozens of different Macintosh models, each slightly different from the other, confusing customers and wasting resources. Jobs scrapped nearly all of them. Instead, he created a simple grid: consumer desktop, consumer laptop, professional desktop, professional laptop. That was it. 4 core products, each laser-focused on its audience. The message was clear. Apple would no longer try to please everyone. It would make fewer products, but each one would be extraordinary. Next, Jobs began rebuilding Apple's brand. He launched the famous Think Different campaign in 1997. The ads featured black and white images of iconic figures like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., and Mahatma Gandhi, with Apple's logo and the words "Think Different." The message was bold. Apple wasn't just selling computers, it was celebrating creativity, rebellion, and human potential. Financially, Apple was still in trouble. Then came another surprising move. Jobs struck a deal with his old rival, Bill Gates of Microsoft. At the 1997 Macworld conference, Jobs stunned the audience by announcing that Microsoft would invest $150 million in Apple and continue developing Microsoft Office for Mac. Many Apple fans booed, but Jobs knew it was necessary. "We have to let go of this notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose," he said. The deal gave Apple the breathing room it needed. With money in the bank and a clearer strategy, Jobs turned to innovation. In 1998, Apple unveiled the iMac, a computer unlike anything the world had seen. Designed by Jony Ive, a young British designer, Jobs elevated to lead Apple's design team. The iMac was colourful, playful, and futuristic. It came in translucent plastic shells of blue, green, and orange, a dramatic break from the boring beige boxes that dominated the PC industry. The iMac wasn't just beautiful, it was also practical. It was easy to set up, came with a built-in modem for connecting to the internet, and emphasized simplicity. The marketing tagline captured it perfectly: "There's no step 3." The iMac was a smash hit, selling millions of units and restoring Apple's reputation as an innovator. Suddenly, people were talking about Apple again, not as a dying company, but as the comeback kid. But Jobs wasn't finished. Behind the scenes, he was already dreaming bigger. He didn't just want to save Apple. he wanted to transform it. He believed Apple could move beyond computers into other industries: music, movies, communication, even the way people lived their daily lives. The stage was set for Apple's second revolution. The iMac saved the company, but what came next would change the world. The iMac in 1998 was only the beginning. Steve Jobs had stabilized Apple and restored its image, but in his mind, computers alone weren't enough. He wanted Apple to lead a digital revolution that would transform music, movies, communication, and eventually the entire lifestyle of its customers. This era would later be called the iRevolution, because nearly every breakthrough product carried the iconic lowercase I. The iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. In 2001, Apple unveiled a small white device that looked simple but carried immense power: the iPod. At the time, portable music players were clunky, with limited storage and confusing interfaces. The iPod changed everything. With its sleek design, easy-to-use scroll wheel, and the ability to store 1,000 songs in your pocket, it became a cultural phenomenon. Alongside it, Apple launched iTunes, a music management software that allowed users to organize and play their digital music. 2 years later, in 2003, Apple introduced the iTunes Store, where people could legally purchase and download individual songs for 99 cents each. This was revolutionary. At a time when music piracy was rampant, Apple gave the music industry a lifeline and consumers a legal, convenient alternative. The iPod plus iTunes ecosystem locked millions of users into Apple's world. While the iPod was wildly successful, Jobs was already thinking about the next leap. Mobile phones were everywhere, but they were complicated, clumsy, and terrible at browsing the internet. Jobs believed Apple could reinvent the phone. On January 9, 2007, Jobs stood on stage at Macworld and made history. He announced a device that combined an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator, all in one. That device was the iPhone. The iPhone eliminated the physical keyboard and replaced it with a multi-touch screen. It introduced intuitive gestures like pinch to zoom. It put the internet, music, apps, and communication all in one sleek device. Jobs' keynote became legendary as he declared, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." He was right. The iPhone not only revolutionized Apple, but also the entire world. It set the standard for modern smartphones, reshaped industries, and became the centerpiece of people's daily lives. In 2008, Apple launched the App Store, a digital marketplace where developers could create and sell applications for the iPhone. Within days, hundreds of apps were available, and within months, millions of downloads were taking place. The App Store created a new economy. Developers built apps for games, productivity, communication, and entertainment. Apple took a 30% cut of sales, generating billions in revenue. But more importantly, the App Store expanded what the iPhone could do, turning it into a platform rather than just a product. Not long after, in 2010, Apple introduced the iPad. Critics initially dismissed it as just a big iPhone, but consumers embraced it. The iPad created a new category of devices, larger than a phone, more portable than a laptop, and became essential for students, professionals, and creatives. By the early 2010s, Apple wasn't just a tech company, it was a cultural icon. Its products weren't only tools, they were status symbols. White earbuds became a fashion statement. The iPhone became the most desirable gadget in the world. Apple's advertising campaigns emphasized emotion and creativity, connecting deeply with users. Financially, the results were staggering. Apple went from near bankruptcy in the 1990s to becoming one of the most profitable companies on Earth. Each new product launch attracted global media attention and massive lines outside Apple stores. The revolution had reshaped not just Apple, but modern life itself. People listened to music differently, communicated differently, worked differently, and even thought differently because of Apple. But while Apple soared to unprecedented heights, one shadow loomed large. Steve Jobs' health was declining. And soon, Apple would face the challenge of moving into a future without its visionary leader. By the early 2010s, Apple was no longer just a company that made computers or gadgets. It had become a global force of culture, design, and innovation. The products created during Steve Jobs' second era, the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad, had transformed the way billions of people lived, worked, and communicated. Apple's influence could be felt everywhere. In coffee shops, white iPod earphones dangled from countless ears. In classrooms, students carried iPads instead of stacks of books. In boardrooms, executives showed presentations on sleek MacBooks, and in nearly every pocket, the iPhone was becoming an essential part of daily life. One of Apple's greatest strengths was its obsession with design. Jobs believed that technology should not only work well, but also look and feel beautiful. Partnering with Jony Ive, Apple's head of design, he pushed for products that were minimalist, elegant, and intuitive. The iPhone's smooth glass surface, the MacBook's unibody aluminum shell, the iMac's clean curves, all became instantly recognizable. Apple's packaging, too, was carefully crafted to make unboxing a joyful experience. This attention to detail created an emotional bond with customers. For many, buying an Apple product wasn't just a purchase, it was joining a lifestyle, a club of people who valued creativity, simplicity, and innovation. The ecosystem effect. Another key to Apple's success was its growing ecosystem. Unlike competitors who focused on individual products, Apple created a tightly integrated system where all its devices worked together seamlessly. iTunes synced music across iPods, iPhones, and Macs. The App Store expanded across iPhone and iPad. iCloud allowed files, photos, and messages to move smoothly between devices. This ecosystem made it harder for customers to leave Apple. Once someone owned an iPhone, they wanted a MacBook to sync with it, then AirPods to pair instantly, and so on. Each product strengthened the bond with the brand. Apple's marketing was as revolutionary as its technology. The company knew how to build hype like no other. Product launches became global events, watched live by millions. Stores were designed like temples, with glass walls, wooden tables, and the iconic glowing Apple logo. Even Apple's commercials carried cultural weight. From the Think Different campaign celebrating rebels and visionaries, to the iPod's dancing silhouette ads, to the famous line, "There's an app for that." Apple always sold more than products. It sold emotion, identity, and inspiration. Apple's success showed in the numbers. By 2011, it was one of the most profitable companies on Earth. Its market value rivaled oil giants and banks. In 2018, Apple would become the first US company worth $1 trillion, a milestone that reflected not just financial power, but also cultural dominance. Apple was everywhere: music, phones, computers, tablets, even movies through iTunes. It had influenced how people interacted with technology on a scale no other company had achieved before. But behind the triumphs, one looming challenge could not be ignored: Steve Jobs' health. He had battled pancreatic cancer since 2004, undergoing treatments and medical leave. Each time he appeared on stage, thinner and weaker, fans worried. Yet even in his most fragile state, Jobs continued to lead product launches with his trademark "one more thing." Apple had changed the world, but could it continue to thrive without its visionary founder? That question would soon be answered. In October 2011, the world mourned the loss of Steve Jobs. Just one day after Apple announced the iPhone 4S, Jobs passed away at the age of 56 after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. For millions of fans and for the technology industry, it felt like the end of an era. Apple had lost its co-founder, visionary and spiritual leader. The question on everyone's mind was simple: could Apple survive without Steve Jobs? Jobs himself had prepared for this moment. Before stepping down as CEO in August 2011, he had handpicked Tim Cook to lead the company. Cook was very different from Jobs, calm, methodical, and more focused on operations than on product design. For years, Cook had been Apple's chief operating officer, known for building one of the most efficient supply chains in the world. At first, skeptics doubted him. Many wondered if Apple could continue innovating without Jobs' genius and charisma. But Cook, though quieter, proved to be a steady and capable leader. Under Cook, Apple expanded into wearables. In 2015, it launched the Apple Watch, a smartwatch designed not just as a gadget, but as a health and fitness companion. Over time, it became a powerful tool for tracking workouts, monitoring heart rates, and even detecting irregular heart rhythms. Today, the Apple Watch is the most popular watch in the world, surpassing even luxury brands like Rolex. Another massive success was AirPods, introduced in 2016. At first, people joked about the funny-looking wireless earbuds, but soon AirPods became a cultural icon, praised for their convenience, sound quality, and seamless integration with the iPhone. They symbolized Apple's shift toward a wireless future, where devices connect effortlessly without cables. Tim Cook also shifted Apple's focus beyond hardware. While iPhones, iPads, and Macs remained the backbone of the company, Cook pushed into services, digital subscriptions that tied customers even closer to Apple's ecosystem. Apple Music took on Spotify. Apple TV Plus entered the streaming wars with original shows like Ted Lasso. iCloud grew into a central storage hub. Apple Pay changed the way people handled money. These services created recurring revenue, making Apple less dependent on hardware sales. Of course, the iPhone continued to evolve. Larger screens, better cameras, Face ID, and edge-to-edge displays kept the iPhone at the top of the smartphone market. The iPhone XS in 2017 was a milestone, introducing the modern design still used today. Despite growing competition from Samsung, Huawei, and others, Apple maintained a loyal following. Each new release drew massive attention, long lines at Apple stores, and record-breaking sales. Unlike Jobs, who was fiery and visionary, Cook was steady and practical. He wasn't a showman, but he was a brilliant manager. Under his leadership, Apple became not just a technology icon, but also a financial giant. In 2018, Apple became the first US company to reach a $1 trillion market value. By 2020, it doubled that to $2 trillion. Cook proved that Apple could not only survive without Jobs, but thrive. Yet, through all this growth, Apple remained faithful to Steve Jobs' core principles: simplicity, elegance, and a focus on user experience. Cook often reminded employees of Jobs' values and made sure Apple's DNA stayed intact. Apple after Steve Jobs was different, more corporate, more focused on services and expansion, but the essence of innovation and design still burned strong. The company had not only survived its founder's death, it had entered a new golden age. By the 2020s, Apple was no longer just a technology company. It had become one of the most valuable corporations in human history, with a market value soaring past $3 trillion at times, larger than the economies of many nations. But Apple's story was not only about numbers. It was about how deeply the company had embedded itself into people's daily lives. Apple today. The core products. Still Apple's crown jewel, the iPhone continued to dominate the smartphone market. Each year brought better cameras, faster processors, and new features like cinematic video, advanced AI-powered photography, and 5G connectivity. For many, the iPhone wasn't just a phone. It was their primary computer, their camera, their wallet, and their lifeline to the world. Mac. In 2020, Apple made a bold move by shifting from Intel processors to its own Apple Silicon chips, starting with the M1 chip. The performance shocked the industry, faster, more efficient, and quieter than competitors. The Mac, once seen as a niche product, suddenly became the gold standard for laptops and desktops again. iPad. Apple's tablet evolved into a powerful productivity tool, with models like the iPad Pro rivaling laptops. With the Apple Pencil and Magic Keyboard, it became popular among artists, students, and professionals. Wearables. The Apple Watch and AirPods dominated their categories. Apple Watch became a health device capable of detecting irregular heart rhythms, oxygen levels, and even crashes or falls. AirPods became the world's best-selling headphones, setting the tone for the wireless audio era. Services. Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Apple Arcade, and iCloud grew into a multi-billion-dollar business. Services were now Apple's second-largest revenue source, after the iPhone. Apple wasn't stopping at phones, laptops, or watches. Its eyes were set on the next frontier of technology. Augmented reality, AR, and virtual reality, VR. In 2023, Apple introduced the Vision Pro, a mixed reality headset. Though expensive, it represented Apple's belief that AR could be the future of computing, where digital and physical worlds blend seamlessly. Artificial intelligence, AI. Apple, known for being secretive, has been quietly embedding AI into its products. Siri, photo recognition, predictive typing, and health monitoring. In the future, AI could reshape how people interact with every Apple device. Automotive ambitions. For years, rumors circulated about the Apple Car, a self-driving electric vehicle project. While still uncertain, Apple's interest in the automotive industry showed how far the company was willing to go to shape the future. Beyond technology, Apple positioned itself as a leader in privacy, environment, and health. Privacy. Apple marketed itself as the company that protected user data, unlike competitors that relied on ads. Features like app tracking, transparency, gave users control over who could track them online. Environment. Apple committed to being carbon neutral across its entire supply chain by 2030, pushing for recycled materials and renewable energy. Health. With the Apple Watch and health initiatives, Apple shifted from being a tech company to also being a health partner, potentially saving lives through early detection of medical issues. Of course, even giants face challenges. Governments worldwide scrutinized Apple's App Store fees and business practices. Competitors like Samsung, Google, and emerging Chinese brands pushed hard in smartphones. In AR, AI, and cars, Apple faced stiff competition from both tech and automotive giants. But Apple had one advantage few could match: loyalty. Its customers weren't just buying devices, they were living in an ecosystem. Once inside, it was hard to leave. This loyalty gave Apple stability, even when entering risky new markets. Looking ahead, Apple's vision seemed clear: a future where technology is seamlessly woven into human life, where devices disappear and experiences remain, where health, creativity, and connection flow effortlessly through design and innovation. From a garage in Los Altos to the most valuable company in the world, Apple's journey was already legendary. But the company wasn't done. The next chapter, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and perhaps even reinventing the car, was still being written. The world was watching, and once again, Apple stood at the edge of the future. Apple's story, spanning more than 4 decades, is a tale of vision, innovation, failure, and triumph. From a small garage in Los Altos to a company that influences billions worldwide, Apple has become more than just a technology brand. It has become a symbol of creativity, design, and relentless ambition. At the heart of Apple's success is its culture of innovation. From Steve Jobs' early insistence on simplicity and beauty to Tim Cook's operational mastery, Apple has maintained a unique philosophy. Design matters. User experience comes first, and products must inspire. Whether it was the first Macintosh with a graphical user interface, the iPod that revolutionized music, the iPhone that transformed communication, or the Apple Watch that redefined health technology, Apple consistently challenged the status quo. Impact on technology and society. Apple has changed the world in profound ways. Computing. Personal computers became accessible, intuitive, and desirable. Music. iTunes and the iPod reshaped how people consume and pay for music. Telecommunication. The iPhone created the smartphone era, merging communication, photography, and computing. Entertainment. Apple TV+, iTunes, and App Store changed the way content is distributed and consumed. Health and lifestyle. Apple Watch and health apps empowered individuals to monitor wellness like never before. Beyond products, Apple has also set standards in design, marketing, and branding. Its minimalist aesthetic has inspired countless other companies, and its marketing campaigns have become case studies in connecting with emotion, culture, and identity. Lessons from Apple's journey. Apple's story teaches several powerful lessons. 1. Vision matters. Steve Jobs' ability to imagine products people didn't even know they needed changed the world. 2. Failure is part of the journey. From the Lisa to Jobs being ousted, setbacks were critical to growth. 3. Design and experience can be a differentiator. Technology alone isn't enough. How it feels, looks, and integrates into life matters. 4. Leadership shapes culture. Jobs' intensity and Cook's steadiness both left indelible marks on Apple's identity. 5. Innovation never stops. Even after decades of success, Apple continues to explore new frontiers like AR, AI, and perhaps autonomous vehicles. Today, the Apple logo is instantly recognizable worldwide. It doesn't just signify a company, it represents innovation, aspiration, and excellence. Owning an Apple product is often as much about belonging to a culture and lifestyle as it is about using a device. From classrooms to offices, from music studios to hospitals, Apple devices have touched nearly every aspect of modern life. The company has influenced how people communicate, learn, work, and even think. Apple's story is still being written. As technology advances, as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and health innovation take center stage, Apple will likely continue to lead. But its legacy is already secure. The legacy of Apple is not just in its products. It's in the belief that technology should be human, beautiful, and empowering. It's in the courage to dream big, to challenge norms, and to build tools that make life better, easier, and more connected. From a garage in California to the most valuable company in the world, Apple's journey is proof that vision, persistence, and boldness can change the world. And so, the story of Apple continues, not just as a company, but as a symbol of what happens when imagination meets determination.